Hello, this is James Rees, and welcome back to Razorwire. This is going to be the first in a very long series of videos where we're going to put a bit of a spotlight on technology. What we're planning to do is we're planning to kind of go over some of the sort of security items, issues, solutions that you can actually put into your infrastructure to help protect you against certain types of attacks, multiple types of attacks, whatever it may well be. Today, for the first ever episode, what we're actually going to be talking about is probably one of the more complicated ones. Just start as we mean to go on. Um, Encryption, and we have Scott Glazer from Atakama here to help us out. Scott, do you want to give yourself a bit of an intro to the guys watching?
Absolutely. So thanks for having us. My name is Scott Glazer. I'm with Atakama. We're a New York City-based software company. We focus exclusively on building encryption software. Today, focused on unstructured data, moving into structured data, and a lot of other exciting things on the roadmap. So very happy to be here and very excited to be talking with you today.
Thanks, Scott. It's great speaking to you as well. I know we've spoken a few times about this particular subject. So, what I really kind of want to do is kind of go over a bit of an intro to encryption. It's a bit of a dark art in many respects to some people. A lot of people know what encryption is roughly, but I don't think a lot of people realize how old it actually is. I mean, there's a lot of kind of discussion over the earliest form of encryption that we know of, but the earliest reference really that we've seen where something's truly encrypted and not just a bit of hieroglyphics that the ancient Egyptians used to use is actually around 1500 BC in Mesopotamia, and it was a craftsman's recipe for pottery glaze. Why he decided he wanted to encrypt that, I have no idea, but it's some form of IP. And funnily enough, that's really, in many respects, what we're looking to use that kind of thing for today. I mean, encryption has a long history. It was used by the Greeks. It was used by various different Arabic nations. It's been used during medieval times. Many, many times it was used for encrypting communications either between generals, military units, that kind of thing. But quite frequently, it was used between, two people, lovers, maybe who shouldn't not been in that situation to hide things from their husbands and their wives and that kind of thing. So it's got quite a rich history, and you've got things like steganography. You've got various different cipher sets that have been used over time. But in more modern times, it was used quite a bit during the Second World War, as we all know. The Enigma machine, old Turing, sort of cracking into that particular code. We also had the American Navajo code talkers who spoke in their more traditional language, who didn't have words for things like a submarine, so they used things like iron fish or metal fish and that kind of thing. And of course, anybody listening in, for them, it was just like, well, what is this? It's a language, but nobody had access to it unless you were in North America and you were a code talker. And of course, there weren't many of them left even at that point. Moving on to more modern times, encryption has been used quite extensively in the payment industry to encrypt payments in transit, or card data at rest, that kind of thing. We're all used to kind of e-commerce platform levels of encryption. It has been around as a concept, not really even as a concept, as a solution available to the digital world for a number of years. But I think, in many respects, especially in the early days, there was the fear that if you encrypt your key data, maybe if you lose the keys or something becomes corrupt, then you would lose access to that data. And it's not been as widely adopted until really recently. I mean, Scott, you're the encryption guy here. I do infosec as a day job. You live and breathe this. I mean, the modern history of encryption has been a bit of a funny one, isn't it? PGP was pretty much the standard for so long now, that people are used to how that used to work. They used to have, the problems that came with PGP when you lost your keys. You couldn't validate things. You couldn't read messages. What are your thoughts on kind of more modern encryption?
Yeah, so appreciate that. So, from our perspective, encryption's been around for many decades, and really has lacked any meaningful innovation. There's been threats in the market that people have been focused on 10, 15, 20 years ago, more focused on how do I protect against physical security of my hardware. I've got a server closet when that was a thing, and I want to make sure that if there's someone breaks into the office and is able to somehow gain access to the server, is my hard drive encrypted? Same with the laptops. If I leave my laptop in the airport, Starbucks, or something along those lines, I think that in a lot of cases, from what we've seen over the years, a lot of folks believe they have encryption taken care of. It's a problem that they've solved for. They may not have even implemented any type of advanced level of encryption. They could have they're content, I should say, with what the encryption has come with something else, with the hard drive, with the hardware, with the cloud. I think encryption, and you kind of touched on it, has also been a little bit of a scary topic for a lot of folks. Unless you're really educated and experienced and have years of really true understanding of how it works. To your point, there's a lot of folks that have been concerned about if I get too granular, what's that going to mean to getting locked out of my data, as you touched on it. Also, obviously, is we always say in security, and not even just with encryption, is we can lock down our data and ensure that it's incredibly secure. But if we get too granular, then people aren't going to be able to do their work. Mm-hmm. If people don't do their work, we don't have a business. If we don't have a business, we have nothing to protect. So there's been a lot of different concerns, I think, around encryption. Inertia, I think for sure that it's been solved for. But for 10, 20 years, 10, 15 years now, people have been talking about passwords. Passwords have been a topic. Whether it's multifactor authentication, which was came onto the market, I guess 10 or so years ago, where people were saying, why do I need this? We change our passwords. I've got Active Directory. Everything's good. At the end of the day, passwords have been a topic for a very long time, and people have been concerned about passwords getting compromised, unauthorized access to the network. And I think most people don't really focus or really understand on the password component of encryption. Mm-hmm. And the identity access and management of how that works with encryption. So, encryption's been around for many, many years, and hasn't been deployed in any meaningful way from our perspective. And even the more advanced forms of encryption that have been deployed, they have a number of gaps that, when user identity, credentials, identity and access management controls break down, everything fails. And when that happens, things like Active Directory and your other IAM tools begin to work against you. Mm-hmm. So, we haven't seen a lot of innovation within encryption over the years. We're bringing something to the market that has kind of shaken things up a bit. And most importantly, regardless of the innovation, is really helping people secure their data in a very granular, very meaningful way.
Absolutely. I think in historic, more recent history, I mean, you sort of go back sort of 10, 15, maybe even 20 odd years, encryption's really kind of been baked into things like, the password transition state from wherever you're logging in to wherever it's authenticating at. We're very good at implementing encryption in a way that you never quite see, or you're only just slightly aware of. So e-commerce, for instance, encryption has been around with that now for donkey's years, and it's an accepted part of technology. You don't even think now, if you've got a payment page or you've got a login page, boom, you're gonna automatically think, yeah, we've got to encrypt that, because what's the point if we don't? It's only probably in the last, 10 years. I mean, as I said, encryption has been around for a long time, but it wasn't something you saw widely adopted, as you pointed out. Now we've seen attacks occurring that are where data is being stolen, it's being released out on the internet. We all have seen the horror stories most recently, but even going back sort of maybe 10 years, 15 years, we'd learned our lessons, original lessons around encryption when you look past the historical value of it and the warfare value of it. From early days where databases were compromised with cardholder data in it. I'm a PCI DSS QSA. I spend a lot of my time doing audits on this kind of thing, and it's been around for quite a while. I've seen lots of different iterations of it. Whereas now we're actually starting to see a significant rise in the need for encryption at a number of additional different levels. People have, and you made a very good point there, things like BitLocker, that kind of stuff, it was all kind of tied in with your credentials. So as long as you could log in, you were okay, you could get through that. There were ways for you to still access that data. But now, we've been talking about multi-factor authentication for quite a while. I think I get the impression I've been in this game for 25 years. I think it's only really in the last 5, 6, maybe 7 years that we're starting to actually implement multi-factor authentication, even in just the standard login to whatever infrastructure you have. Yes, it was used quite a bit previously with your remote users and logging in and two-factor authentication, especially with admins logging into remote locations. But when you're in the network, no, you just normally rock up, you username, password. There was many banking institutions, obviously. If I don't know if you remember going into the branch, and they'd have the card, and they'd plug it in, and then they'd authenticate, and it was all done. But actual encryption, encryption of data, encryption of even email, it's become so important just in the last 2 years. I mean, the explosion of ransomware, we all know, we've all seen it. CNA Reinsurance, Colonial Pipeline, Irish Health Authority, bloody Health Authority. I mean, just there you go. I mean, that's just frightening in itself. All of these different organizations, be they manufacturing, be they some kind of software development, finance, health authorities, hospitals, healthcare over in the States has been hit, I know, pretty hard from what I've read. Nobody is safe from what it is. I mean, I've covered ransomware quite extensively myself in the channel with some of the larger issues that have come out, but I know you and Atakama have had a number of probably more advanced conversations with a number of other types of institutions, like banking institutions and larger institutions with significant amounts of IP. I mean, what are you sort of seeing at the moment? What are the trends that you're seeing? I mean, what are the kind of conversations that you guys are having?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think historically with security, every CIO, CISO, security professional that's got a program built in larger or even mid-market enterprises, they're trying to strike that balance between security and accessibility of the data, right? We need to let people do their work. The one thing we've heard historically is we can't create friction. Even with, again, we're touching on, we do encryption, but we're talking on multi-factor authentication. Back in the day, they'd say, oh, we don't want to put an app on their phone. It's going to create an extra step. The sales team's not going to like it. Finance team's going to get frustrated. And, I think we're starting to see that narrative shift a bit, and thankfully so. It's obviously important to empower the business. It's obviously important to minimize friction within the enterprise. But if you take an approach that says, keeping people happy and ensuring that they don't have to do too much to log into the network or access their data as your first approach, I think that's what's really beginning to shift, thankfully. Because, again, wouldn't advocate to make it impossible to do our work, or else people aren't going to want to work there. We're not going to make money. The business is going to fail, and we're not going to have anything to protect. But at the same time, we can't simply create a zero friction environment, because if we create a zero friction environment for our employees, well, guess what? We're creating a zero friction environment for the adversary.
Hmm.
And the adversary is opportunistic, you know, beyond the, targeted attacks that we're seeing in the market. We're seeing the attackers looking for low-hanging fruit.
Hmm.
And you mentioned a number of kind of headline attacks, but the reality is what you don't hear about is some of the things that we hear about when we're talking to clients, and probably some of the things that you hear about when you're talking to your clients, which are those same attacks that are happening every day, but they're not on the front page of the newspaper because maybe
Oh,
you
yes.
don't know about the company. So you're talking about the big names, you're talking about the $40 million ransom payments and the $4 million ransom payments, and everyone's talking about, oh my God, the Colonial Pipeline attack. But what about the regional bank in the U.S.? What about the small insurance company, based wherever? No one's hearing about those attacks, and they're real, and it's not going away and accelerating. So to just really get back to your question, what we're seeing is a bit of a shift. We had a new client come on board recently where, from the CEO's mouth that said, we got to do more to proactively defend against data exfiltration. That's one of our top priorities for the next 12 months, because, I don't want to be the next statistic. I don't want to be on the front page of the paper. And I'm willing to invest whatever's required to prevent, as best I can, one of these attacks happening on my front lawn. So, you touched on, passwords and how how important they've been in the security stack for many, many years. And the problem is, you mentioned, BitLocker and some of these other solutions. Well, to the non-technical business user, they're not even aware that encryption's even in place.
Mm.
Because all they do is they log into the network or their cloud or wherever they're doing their work, and boom, everything's available. They're like, great, I got my cup of coffee, I open my files, I open my Excel model, I start doing my work, life is good. Great. So they don't even know that encryption's happening. And that really is to my point that I made, which was, in order to make security work, historically, we got to make it frictionless. We can't impact the users. We got to let them do their job. But unfortunately, the time has come where I think people are starting to realize, we have to move away from passwords completely. Mm-hmm. And you're seeing that with some of the MFA tools. You're seeing that with a lot of other solutions in the security stack where, passwords connected to some sort of a transparency within the security program is going to fail. It's only a matter of time. It's not that difficult for an attacker, without getting into the specifics of their tools that they're using and the advanced capabilities that they have, to simply spoof a user to click on a link, and next thing you know, they're watching every keystroke and they're able to capture their password. I mean, it's really not that difficult. Mm-hmm. And once they do that, then they're able to log in undetected as the user. Your encryption's going to fail. Everything's going to fail. And that's when we say, when your password's compromised and an attacker is able to log in undetected, things like Active Directory and many other security tools, they begin to work against you. And, so what we're seeing is folks really starting to wake up and realize, if you're doing security the same way today as you did even 2 years ago, I was going to say 5 years ago or 10 years ago, but even a year ago or even 6 months ago, things are changing really fast. Things are changing dramatically. COVID certainly accelerated a number of things. The castle and moat strategy is just a failing prophecy. It's not going to work. We can't continue to build bigger, higher walls and deeper, wider moats, because now we used to have 5 or 10 entry points into the network. Now we have 5,000 because everybody's working from home. And while we hope that COVID's going to certainly improve over the next couple of months, the reality is some percentage of the workforce is going to continue working from home. And now you're only as strong as your weakest link. Mm-hmm. And we're only as strong as the internet access at someone's home. So we're starting to see a shift. We're starting to see more people give us a call and say, hey, we want to do more with encryption. We haven't done enough historically. We haven't focused enough on the encryption of data at rest. You're certainly seeing, and in transit, we're certainly seeing the regulators who have been, I think by design, a bit ambiguous with what they mean about how you should use encryption and what is the definition of data at rest and data in transit. We're seeing more and more in the U.S. It's statewide. It's only state by state, but it's only a matter of time before it becomes federal, like it has been in with GDPR and in other countries that have similar privacy laws. So it's about time that people just begin to shift their mentality a little bit about what are some of the proactive approaches that I can take to make my data useless.
Mm-hmm.
And really focus on the fact that I'm not going to be able to keep the bad guys out. The better strategy is to assume they're already there. And
I think that's fantastic. And there's a couple of points you touched on there, really nicely. I just want to kind of mention. I mean, security in the last couple of years. I mean, let's go sort of back 5-10 years ago. Security was very much an IT problem, and it's now morphed into a very much a board level problem. And you mentioned you've got CEOs, you've got people at the top levels and echelons of business coming and saying, right, what are we going to do to protect our data? I do not want to find our data being nicked. A very English way of saying stolen there, sorry, and pushed out to the dark web and then released for everybody to see. I mean, I think one of the first more modern versions of that was that Sony hack years ago, where they stole all of the email details and some of the interesting discussions that were going on, with some of the high-end directors there about actors and about actresses and about who was good and who was bad. And again, you mentioned, further on from that, the attack patterns that malicious actors are undertaking have changed quite dramatically. Whereas before they would break in, they would grab the credit card data, it was high worth back then, sell them on the internet and so on, on the dark web, so on and so forth, to the carders and to the people who would utilize that kind of data for nefarious means. And, then they started hitting out with the ransomware. You'd download something, or you would get emailed something. Like traditional viruses used to get into your infrastructure. You'd double click on it, and boom, before you know it, you have the nice little message come up on the screen saying, "Congratulations, you've been encrypted, and guess what? You're going to have to pay us some money, and we'll give it back to you." And then at some point they realized that no doubt, the more savvy people had good backups and had good ways of, clearing out the system and then, putting the backup back. Okay, it was still expensive. It still took some time. But some obvious bright spark in the underworld community turned around and said, what would be great? What about if, as we're encrypting it, we also exfiltrate that out, store that away, release some tiny little snippets just to show that we've got it, just to provide some additional proof to the individual that we're trying to sting for some money to decrypt their infrastructure, and say, well, if you don't pay us, if you don't get the decrypt to decrypt your data, that's not a problem. What are you going to do about the fact that we're going to release your data? We're going to cause you GDPR issues. We're going to cause you PCI DSS issues. We're going to cause you, we will do, put all of your dirty laundry out for everyone on the internet to see, quite gladly. So pay us by this date. You then have another date, and the ransom doubles just to provide you with additional bit of pay. But that's what we do now. And that was ransomware. And that was a little while back, in the grand scheme of things, not that long ago. But now malicious actors are getting in via the various different means that we've just discussed. Cracking username, passwords, VPN access. I think one of the organizations that was recently done was an old VPN that was cracked into.
Yep.
And they're actually dropping this ransomware directly onto the network, running it with no doubt the administrative username and password they've sniffed from the traffic. So there's nothing to do with having to rely on a standard user to have the certain level of access when they run this malicious software, it's going to encrypt them. Now they're using administrative privileges on the network infrastructure, and it doesn't matter if it's in the cloud, it doesn't matter if it's in a data center or in a traditional computer room out the back. Boom, everything is being encrypted, and they're ransoming you for that. This is where I think encryption really comes to shine nowadays, because this is what it is designed to do. Yes, they can steal your data. They can take all the gigs, the petabytes, the exabytes, however much data that you've got. They could take your books. They could take your IP. They could take your latest plans for a jet fighter or a nuclear bomb or whatever. But, assuming you've got good encryption on that, and they haven't obviously got the keys, that's the other significant thing to keep a bit of a track of, obviously.
Yep.
It's worthless. It's meaningless. You could actually turn around to them and say, fine, release it. What have you got to release? You've got...
Yeah, I agree. And I think that encryption is just, if deployed properly and in a meaningful way, in a very thoughtful strategy, encryption is a very powerful security measure that companies can take. Again, the context of that perimeter being obliterated, the assumption that the attacker is already in your environment. Let's just focus on making the data useless to an unauthorized party, right? And that whole thought process is kind of difficult for even experienced security professionals to wrap their head around. And if deployed well, that is really not to say that it's going to replace existing security strategies, because it's a defense in depth, as we all know, strategy where, every year companies need to be focused on the emerging threats, continuing to focus on the perimeter-based security, but looking at things like encryption that have been historically creepy and concerning and scary, and embrace it. And look and find ways that they can, segment their data first, understand where their sensitive data resides, right? You can't protect what you don't know exists. And it's actually a bit scary that, a number of companies that we talk to about encryption who are really enamored and excited by, our solution. And then, you get to the end of the call or the meeting and they say, this is incredible. I don't even know where to start, because I'm not even sure where all my sensitive data resides. And that's really an important point, right? Because you don't even know where your sensitive data is, how are you going to protect it? And I just think there's, I think companies are historically, we've both been in security for a very long time. Some treat the problem with a little bit more seriousness than others. Others just assume that they're not going to be the next, that it's going to be someone else. It's not going to be them. You get that phone call, right? You guys probably get that phone call a little more frequently than we do, but we get that phone call as well when the conversation goes, interesting, let's keep in touch, to how quickly can you get in here? And I've got a blank check.
Yeah, and it's always after the horse has already bolted, and you're like, what can I do to help you here? And I mean, for the last point before, I really want to talk about Atakama next. I think the last point, and a good point that you inferred just seconds ago, we always talk about defense in depth and infosec, and it's important. It's important to have good passwords, authentication, access control, roles and responsibilities, group access, all the weird and wonderful AV, file integrity monitoring, and all the good stuff that we always recommend. But encryption is really that last layer in defense in depth, as far as I'm concerned, when everything else has failed, when the proverbial odorous excrement has hit that fan and is currently spinning way out of control, when your chips are down and you have literally been cracked like a nut. If you've got good encryption, they are not going to get your crown jewels, assuming obviously you've implemented it correctly. That is quite a big caveat right there. They may get the low end stuff that you've been producing, the brochures and all the rest of it. But if you plan your encryption correctly, it can be that last line of defense. There you go. You've got it. Well done. Good luck reading it.
Yeah, so, 100% agree. One last point I just read recently that I thought would be relevant to bring up, which is really scary about ransomware, is apparently 80% of those companies hit by ransomware are hit twice. The second time soon after. And 45% of the time they're perceived to be from the same attacker. Now listen to that statistic. 80% are hit the first time. Then they're hit again. And 45% from the same person that hit them the first time. Think about how lucrative that is to the criminals, and think about how frustrating that is to the security community when, you hit once, fine. shame on me. You hit twice, shame on you, I should say. You hit twice, shame on me. Companies need to, take a different approach to defend against this modern day threat.
They also need to remember, criminals. These are criminals. They don't, don't have honor. Their view is to get as much money as possible. So if they can hit you twice, they'll hit you twice. And when you complain about it, they'll just go, well, you didn't fix it, did you? Right. So speaking of fixing it, and moving as a good segue into the second part of our discussion, tell us about Atakama. How is it that you guys can help organizations prevent themselves from being hit by this epidemic that seems to be hitting at the moment? I mean, it's in many respects, it's its own bloody pandemic. I don't want to take anything away from the current pandemic, but you when we look at it as InfoSec people, you have to think this is rapidly adapting in the way that malicious actors are acting. What they're going for now is changing dramatically. The techniques they're using is changing dramatically, but it all ends up in seemingly the same situation. Goodbye data. Hello ransom.
Yep.
Come on, Atakama, give it to us.
Yeah. So appreciate it. So look, we touched on a lot of things about traditional encryption, and all of the gaps that exist with traditional encryption is really what we solve for. Historically, most companies have been leveraging full disk or full volume encryption. Mm-hmm. So they're encrypting the hard drive of the server. Users are logging in, they put in their credentials, they're bulk decrypting their data on the server. And that creates a pretty big issue, right? Because rather than file level encryption, where each file is getting their own encryption key, you're encrypting the server in this instance. And once that server is accessed, you're basically bulk decrypting, let's call it 500,000 files all at once. Now we go about our job, we do our work, and that's good and great. Not enough. For the reasons that we mentioned. There aren't a lot of elegant file level encryption solutions in the market historically. As we talk to the market and we meet prospects and clients, it's evident that some have gone down the path of file level encryption and just ended the project because it stopped before it even began because they can't deploy it, right? One of the issues with software in general, and certainly with security software, is simply getting it implemented, right? If it becomes a massive burden or too difficult for the security team to implement, you're implementing hardware, you're configuring, you've got a very complex solution that you've got to deploy. We've heard things like, I got to be a NASA scientist to be able to deploy this thing. And it took me 6 to 12 months and it's still not working. And it's like, full stop. If you're building software in this day and age, it's got to work. It's got to be easy. This is what's the expectation for the most part, with software and security software today. File level encryption itself, I think, is unique, and that's what we do. We encrypt each file with its own AES 256-bit encryption key. The second bit that we've been touched on quite a bit is really the gaps that have existed with traditional encryption. To make it work in the enterprise, to reduce that friction, to ensure that the users are happy, encryption's been connected to user credentials. Usernames and passwords, identity and access management controls. So when I'm logged out of the network, my data is safely encrypted. Once I log in, I come in the morning and I log in, the system recognizes me as an authorized user, grants the keys from the key server, decrypts my data, whether it's full volume, full disk, or file level encryption, and boom, I do my work. Good for me, no friction. But unfortunately, when an adversary is able to compromise my identity, log in undetected as the user, as we know, that's one of the main attack vectors today, which is how do I log in undetected, somehow get admin or super admin credentials, create my own profile, start doing the damage that I do. When that happens, things like Active Directory, your encryption, and everything else basically starts working against you. So when the attacker is able to compromise, they log in undetected, and that's a big gap with encryption. So by design, Atakama file level encryption is completely disconnected from the perimeter. Mm-hmm. We don't use passwords at all, so we're passwordless. We are not connected in any transparency to things like Active Directory. And what that means, and something you touched on, is when all your other security controls fail, when your password's stolen, when your identity is compromised, your files that are encrypted with Atakama remain encrypted. And that's extremely important, very powerful. And, you can go out in the market and go find other encryption solutions that are disconnected from the perimeter the way that we are, and you'll be searching long and far. So that's the first gap that we address with encryption. The second gap that we address with encryption is the concept of, we haven't even touched on, which is both a security risk and an operational nightmare, which is keys. Managing keys, storing keys. One of the items on the list for an attacker when they bypass the perimeter is, where's the key server? I'm going to go grab the key server, because to the extent I encounter encrypted data, I want the keys to decrypt them. So if your keys are sitting on a server or a cloud in a central location, that also creates a risk. It's great that you've implemented encryption, but now your encryption keys are stored in a location that are easily compromised once the perimeter fails. So that creates a pretty big risk, not to mention anyone listening today or watching this today that has deployed any KMS or any is probably smiling and shaking their head right now saying, no, thank you. I never want to do that again. It's complex, it's expensive, it's a full-time job for somebody. And by the way, it's connected to passwords, which means it's only a matter of time until the whole thing fails. And that $100,000 or multi-million-dollar investment, depending upon the size of the organization, is a waste. The way we address that is really the secret sauce or the IP for Atakama, where we leverage an advanced form of cryptography. And it allows us to take that encryption key at the file level, and we break it apart into little pieces that we call shards or key shards. And then we distribute those pieces across multiple physical devices controlled by users, including their mobile phones. So what we've now done is we've decentralized the whole architecture. There is no centralization of where the encryption keys are stored. So there is no central point of attack. There is no password because we don't use them. So in essence, we've eliminated the attack surface related to encryption. So now we've encrypted your data, and all these things that we've been talking about why traditional encryption solutions fail, and how and why companies need to begin thinking differently. We've eliminated those gaps completely, which means that one of the main strategies for security is, how do I make sure that my environment is an undesirable target to an adversary who are looking for the low-hanging fruit? So if I'm protecting my data with Atakama and I'm an attacker that logs into the network, all my crown jewels are encrypted, there's no central key storage, I've already stolen your password, and I can't decrypt your data, well, unless there's a backdoor to AES 256, you are the exact definition of a undesirable target for that attacker on that day. So it's really complex and really innovative under the hood about what we've built, but kind of touched on it earlier. In order to be successful in the larger enterprises, we have to make it easy. It's got to be simple. It can't be impossible to configure and deploy. But most importantly, it has to be easy for the end users to access their data. If we create a barrier, we're still on board with minimizing the friction, but we can't eliminate the friction. There needs to be a little bit of a friction for authorized users to access their data, or else we're making it frictionless, just like we are for the adversary, just like we are. So what we've done that's really incredible is we've introduced the Atakama mobile app. I mentioned how we're taking that encryption key and we're cutting it up into pieces, and we're distributing those pieces out to the physical devices of the users, including their mobile phone. Or on the mobile phone, for the authorized user, they're running the Atakama mobile app. The look and feel is very similar to two-factor authentication by design. We wanted to create as minimal training as possible for the end user who's non-technical, right? The person in finance, the person in HR, the person in sales, et cetera, who is a non-technical user. They are experts in whatever is their job role is, but they're not a technologist by any means. How do we make it simple? So we mimic 2FA, because a lot of organizations have already implemented 2FA. They've already trained their employees that the mobile phone and the security stack is friendly. The only difference is, with Atakama, we're using the mobile phone to store the pieces of the key for each and every file that authorized user has access to. And they're using the mobile phone to leverage the ability to take that piece of the key and send it back to their computer to be able to decrypt the file. So with our software deployed, what happens is when a user, it's a fully distributed system, the software is running on every endpoint. That's where the encryption and the decryption is happening. But when a user goes to access a file that's encrypted with Atakama, they get a push notification to their phone that says, do you want to decrypt this file? They tap their phone and the file decrypts and it opens up. Technically under the hood, what's happening is we're taking that piece of the key from my mobile device. We're sending it back to my computer over a relay server where the file itself has one piece of the key. Our software requires two. So we've got the file with one piece of the key. We've got the other piece of the key on my mobile phone as well as perhaps my 500 colleagues. But when I'm decrypting it, I'm tapping my phone, I'm sending my piece of the key back to my computer. I've got the two minimum pieces of the key that we need to decrypt. The file pops open instantly, and you're good to go. What does that mean? Well, the file on the file server or cloud with that one piece of the key is useless because we need two pieces of the key or more to decrypt. So that attack at the file server or cloud is now a useless attack to the adversary because in the event of exfiltration, the only thing they have is a useless encrypted file with no password, no centralization of the full key. And you're really protecting yourself at the file store from exfiltration or any type of extortion. On the endpoint, well, in order for an attacker to be successful decrypting my data, they need to figure out a way to also compromise my mobile phone. So it's not impossible. Nothing is in security. Anyone that uses that word shouldn't be using that word. But it's magnitudes of improbability that an attacker is going to be able to somehow compromise my laptop and my mobile phone, not your laptop and my mobile phone, or my mobile phone and your, et cetera, and so on. And it's also not the ROI of an attack, right? The ROI of an attack these days is not to somehow reverse engineer a unique solution like Atakama on an endpoint and be able to decrypt the file. But even in that case, you're only getting the key to that one file. That's the big difference as well. It's file level encryption. So as opposed to the whole server, we're only basically encrypting on a file by file basis. So really unique, really, most importantly, really secure. Really secure against the modern day threat from 4,000 or 5,000 away, remote access to the network, but super easy to use. I like to say that if an employee is able to take their phone out of their pocket or purse and tap the screen, they've just been trained to use Atakama.
Absolutely. I mean, when I saw the product myself, and I was really impressed with some of the features that it had. I think what really got me was you can encrypt a file and you can require more than one level of authorization to access that file. So we all heard the story that in Coca-Cola, you've got one director who's got one half of the key to be able to access the safe with the actual recipe, and then you got the other one as well. They never travel in the same direction. They never go on the same meet in person or whatever. Traditional military used to use that. You used to have one person with half the key in the briefcase, and then you'd have another one with the other half the key in the briefcase, and they go in different directions. You've done basically the same thing, but digitally, haven't you?
That's exactly right. So we talked about the most common construct for our clients, which is we need two pieces of the key to recreate the key to decrypt. But the cryptography that we're leveraging is called threshold cryptography. And that means that we can set any M of N combination to recreate that encryption key, two or more. So what that means is I can have 10 pieces of the key across 10 different devices and only require two pieces. But to your question, we could require 3, we could require 4. So the example of the secret formula to Coca-Cola being in digital form, right, a file form, we can say that we want to have 10 board members that have access to the Atakama software. Everyone's got their own piece of the key, and we require 7 of the 10 board members to tap their phone to decrypt that file. Certainly a extreme case, but depending if you're trying to protect the secret formula of Coca-Cola, probably a very good use case for that use case.
But it's, I mean, sorry to interrupt you there, but I think that's fantastic. It's very similar in many respects to the old nuclear key. The old, you have on a submarine, you have two, you have the captain, and then you have their chief officer, and it requires both of them to be able to launch that missile. So if there's ever a disagreement, it doesn't get launched.
Exactly right.
Okay, we've all seen the films where people shoot one another and all the rest of it, but that's by the by. That's something else entirely. What I love about this is you can actually set that. So I could say, right, I don't want my accounts to be released until they're ready. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lock it, and it's going to require my authentication, my finance director's authentication, and if something happens to me, another board member. So you can have three sort of pieces of key. So if I go to exfiltrate that data out to go and sell it to our competitor, and I send it over, they can't even decrypt it, because I'd have to convince at least one other person in that group of 3 people who could decrypt it to basically tap the phone, and then of course it's all logged.
Yeah, and we can configure that location by location, so we can have a certain folder that has that level of security and other folders that are a little bit less. It's very flexible. We can deploy Atakama in a way where you point it at a location or a file server and say everything's encrypted by default. Everything that's there is encrypted. Any future file it gets is encrypted, and that's one use case, right? I know where my data is. It's all sensitive. Encrypt everything. I don't want to think about it. Users have the keys. Everyone's happy. We also have a really scalable, really exciting second deployment model, what we call selective encryption, where you can selectively encrypt only certain files within a file server or cloud based on selectively deciding what I want to encrypt, whether it's manual, which is, you don't want to leave things up to subjectivity, but the real scalable strategy is I've already classified my data. I'm leveraging software that has done the data discovery and classification. So now I've identified all my sensitive information. I know where it is. I've created an inventory of my data. I'm calling it PII, PCI, PHI, what have you. I know where it is. You can deploy Atakama in a manner that just looks for certain sensitivity labels that you want to encrypt, and just automatically on the fly encrypt those files, cut up the key, distribute it out to all users, and it really completes that strategy. So there's a lot of different deployment models that we support that you can create, like we discussed, that sort of nuclear key and kind of ratchet up the requirements. You can encrypt everything. You can selectively encrypt certain files. You can choose certain locations where we don't need encryption because there's nothing private there. So you don't have to lock down every piece of data in your environment and create all these barriers. You can empower your users to only have to tap their phone for the sensitive documents. And that's where that second tap of the phone really becomes justified to the organization, because those employees that raise their hand, like all security professionals have heard before, it's like, oh, I don't like this. It's creating too much work, work for me. I can't get my work done. You're like, well, if I didn't encrypt that file and it got exfiltrated, you'd be out of a job. We'd be up the wazoo in fines, and this wouldn't be good for anybody. So we have to do these things, and it gives that flexibility. The other thing I wanted to point out, just to talk about, how do we, be as flexible as we can, is we also have functionality that allows you to not have to tap the phone for every single file to decrypt. Based on the risk-based approach to security, a security team can say, I want to allow my users to open 50 files over the next 8 hours, something we call a session. So they come in the morning, they open they open their first file, they kick off a session, and now they'll have 50 files over 8 hours to be able to do their work without having to tap their phone. Slight performance hack. You can, customize that session to whatever you want. Slightly less secure probably than tapping your phone for each and every file. But your biggest risk is that an adversary is eavesdropping on your endpoint at a point in time where you're running that session. And even in that event, which is not entirely how attacks are happening in the middle of the day when people are working, but possible, you're only exposing yourself to 50 files over 8 hours versus the status quo, which is I steal your password, I log in undetected, and I steal 500,000 files. So we have baked in productivity hacks, and another neat feature that is maybe neat's not the right word, extremely important feature is our logging feature. Every read-write action on an Atakama encrypted file generates a log. So now we have a full audit trail of who's accessing the encrypted data. Audit and compliance. We know that Scott accessed this file at 9:22 and 22 seconds. in that folder location, on that endpoint, no ambiguity. So not only for audit and compliance, but even if malware were to try to deploy on my endpoint, as an example, and try to lock up those files, well, because every read-write attempt on my Atakama encrypted files is generating a push notification. If I'm sleeping, those will time out, and then we feed those into the SOC or your SIMs. So therefore, your security team is going to get dozens of alerts all at once when there's nefarious activity happening on an endpoint that may have prevented a pretty gruesome malware ransomware attack. So a lot of different use cases: cloud security, regulatory, encryption of data at rest, things of that nature. So, a lot of innovation, but most importantly, really protecting companies against what I like to call the modern day threat. That server closet is a thing of the past. Yeah. Certainly shouldn't forget about full disk, full volume encryption. We support. We can get on top of that, but companies need to begin thinking differently. And what we've really solved for is the ability to get granular to the file level and really use encryption in a meaningful way.
Absolutely. So what happens if you want to share a file with, I produce a lot of sort of sensitive reports, so do my team. We're consultants. We go in, we help people with their security, we make recommendations, that kind of thing. There's a way for me to actually share that report in a secure manner where I know who's, when someone's accessing it. So I know that my customer, I can be on the phone to my customer, I can email that customer that file. And then the moment they try to access that from the download link that they're given, because we've actually done this, it comes up and says, do you want to give access? And it's like, well, yeah, it's non-repudiation. I'm giving you authorization to access it. So in the log files, it also says that. So if you're, exfiltrating out some information via that medium to your mate, say you're a trader who's giving some insider trader information, you can actually in the logs go back and say, when they turn around and say, I didn't do it, it must have been someone who cracked my username and password. It's like, well, hang on a minute, you actually tapped and authorized on your phone. That's right. So you can't use plausible deniability anymore because you actually went onto your application and went, yes, give access. Or,
We have a use case actually with a client here in the U.S., a medical malpractice client that goes into litigation, and a read receipt isn't enough. That certain permissible documentation, they can't basically verify with a read receipt that the file in the email was actually downloaded. So we have a really incredible solution called encrypted file transfer, where you can right-click a file, generate a secure link, email that secure link to a third party. They click on the link, a browser window pops open, and the sender controls the decryption for the recipient when the sender is content that the recipient is who they say they are. There's ways that we can verify that. So this particular client is using Atakama to send these sensitive documents, and they're marrying a read receipt with the log that we generate. So when they go to court, they could say, he opened the file and he decrypted it. We have the logs to prove it, and that's permissible. So, there's ways that we can help clients share data outside the organization with third parties. We're auditing it, we're logging it. So we're locking down your data in an incredibly granular way, but we're empowering your employees to do their job. We're ensuring our security guarantee is that any unauthorized user won't have access to your data. The only way that they'll be able to somehow access your data, I like to say it's unfortunate, but some sort of a hijacking or a kidnapping situation where somehow I've been compromised. They've got my laptop, they've got my phone, they can get through the biometrics or the facial recognition to actually get into my phone, and then they're able to force me to tap my phone to decrypt. Not that that's not impossible, but we're doing all these things that are grossly improbable, but we're making it easy in the more normal sense for users to go about their job, access their data, and it's the new way to do security.
I actually have an idea. I'll talk to you after this recording about something I thought about for that one, but we'll leave that for afterwards. I love Atakama. I mean, you hear this a lot, but I have to say that the product is solid. It is solid as a rock. I love it to bits, and I've been dealing with various different types of encryption on and off throughout my entire career. I've seen pretty much everything. I mean, I love when you mentioned about the key server thing. I've had more than my fair share of nightmares of trying to talk customers through the implementation and the crypto periods and how to do the crypto periods. What happens if somebody gets made redundant who actually had access to the thing, and then all of a sudden nobody's got access to the thing? I just didn't want to mention it too early in the thing to send everybody to sleep or scare the willies out of people, because let's face it, that's the key. The key aspect is the one part of encryption that I think that you guys have really cracked in a really nice way. But time is moving on, so if anybody's interested to find out a little bit more about Atakama, please get in touch either with us or Atakama themselves. Just mention Razorthorn, and we'll be more than happy to help you understand a little bit more about what it can do. Although that was a pretty good rundown there from Scott on its capabilities, but seriously, have a look at it. It is very, very good, and it's not often that information security people are impressed, but I was impressed by this one. Scott, thank you ever so much for helping us out with this piece and telling us a bit about Atakama. As always, it's an absolute pleasure working with you.
Same.
Fantastic.
We really appreciate it. You got a fantastic team. Always enjoy our conversations. Look forward to many more, and really appreciate it.
Well, when I can travel, I'll come over to New York, and you can buy me a good old Boston beer.
Sounds good to me, and I'll come do the same. But
fantastic.
Not Boston. A proper price.
Absolutely, yeah. We're just reopening, so hopefully at some point in the next, year, we might be able to travel. But okay, fantastic. So all of you out there, thank you ever so much for watching our first Spotlight on Technology. Please feel free to leave likes, comments. Please also click the little notification bell and subscribe button. We're getting more and more followers every single day. We're starting to get some real throughput on the views. If there is anything you want us to cover, either in this piece or any of the other pieces we do, so the PCI DSS run, or how to get into InfoSec, or just general sort of security concepts, let us know. We'll be more than happy to cover those items as best as possible. We'll pull in various different people that we know, like the fantastic bunch from Atakama today. More than happy to. So look after yourselves out there. Watch out. Ransomware is obviously getting bad. Seriously think about encryption. That's the last thing I will say as an InfoSec professional. Thank you ever so much for watching, and we'll see you again soon. Goodbye.